right? So then the question becomes, how did you become Justin? Like, what is your official title at St. Luke's? Can you tell me?
Absolutely. So I'm the Senior Director for Advanced Analytics at St. Luke's Health System here in Boise, Idaho. And the journey, I think, started, I don't know if you want the short, the medium, or the long answer. The journey started in terms of, the idea of adventure in Alaska, right? So I had some pretty incredible adventures. Also had individuals and friends I knew that passed away from some of the adventures, didn't go very well. And so that was kind of what kicked off how do humans behave under stress and what makes humans tick? And so studying psychology at Montana State was a fantastic opportunity to kind of get the foundation groundwork in for that. It was something that I enjoyed, and it was just kind of, a fun thing to study. In addition to that, I did all the pre-med stuff as well. So I got a really strong science background, like the chemistry, biochemistry, physics, all that kind of stuff. And so I knew I really liked psychology, but I also really liked the bench work, kind of the harder sciences, right? The hard science. And then I had a good friend who went on exchange to Ireland. He came back. We're in Bozeman. We were just doing something random, and he said, "You have to go on exchange." And I was like, "I don't have time. I have to go through and get done in 4 years, then go to something else." And he's like, "No, it will change your life. You have to go on exchange." And so I looked around because I'm a planner. I didn't want to miss and essentially lose a whole year of my undergrad, mostly because I was also paying for school myself. So I found 2 places in the world that would continue along with and not derail me too much for my exchange program, because I was following his advice. His other advice was, you have to go for a year. Don't do a semester. Go for the whole year. I was like, okay. So it was either Australia or Sweden. And I was like, well, both of those sound pretty interesting. Turns out I knew a bunch of people going to Australia. So I was like, kind of looking for the experience where I won't know anybody where I'm going to, and it'll be something that'll be a very new kind of experience to get into. And so I was able to go on exchange to Sweden for a year for my senior year in undergrad. And while I was in Sweden, I found out that if you can get into the university system in Sweden, if you can get accepted, education is essentially free. Oh, you pay for housing and cost of living and stuff. And so that kind of kicked off this spark in me of saying, this is really interesting to live, abroad, kind of being in a new culture, immersed in that. It was phenomenal. And I was greatly enjoying the experience. And I had this kind of idea of if I can get into the master's program in psychology there, I can continue to go for it. And through persistence, I would say immense persistence, I was able to convince them to let me come in and do that. And so I was able to do my master's in Sweden, which is phenomenal. So overall, the total time I spent there was just under 4 years. And it was a phenomenal experience. And then moved back to the United States, and I had a good friend. This is the long version, by the way, so you can edit this out if we need to. But I had a good friend who was living in South Dakota, and he said, "Don't laugh, you should move to Sioux Falls, South Dakota." Now, mind you, I've lived in very high latitude climates, so cold, mostly dark, kind of rainy. Alaska, Bozeman's beautiful, mountains, both places. Sweden was in a forest, but also high latitude. And I was like, there's no way in the world I'm moving to South Dakota. And then in this email, which I still have, I actually dug it up, he goes through in 2 paragraphs and says, "You can stay with me. I'm living in my mom's rental house, so rent is nearly free. You could have my old job at the hospital system in Sioux Falls and kind of get your feet on it. And I commute down, because he was in medical school at the time. I commute down to the university, which is 50 miles away, and you could take some classes if you want." I was like, well, that sounds pretty awesome. So I have a built-in friend base, I have a place to work, and I could take some classes if I'd like to see kind of what I wanted to do at that point. So I did that, and then as I got asked to apply to a PhD program in psychology there, and the longer version, again, this is the fun part of the story, so I have to have 3 letters of recommendation. Now, mind you, I've just moved back to the United States, kind of lost touch with some of my contacts in Bozeman, so I had taken a few courses at that time, and one of the professors I was working with was a neuroscientist, Dr. Cliff Summers, phenomenal, world-famous individual in stress and research, and I remember I walked into Cliff's office, during his office hours, and I said, "Excuse me, Dr. Summers, I'd like to ask you for a letter of recommendation." And he says, "Shut the door." He never shuts the door in his office. Yeah. And I was like, I have highly offended this individual. Something's gone completely wrong. I was like, oh no. And so I shut the door and turned, and he goes, "I don't think you should do that." I was like, oh, kind of having my dreams crushed at the moment, right? And he said, "No, I want you to be in my lab."
Oh.
And that was a moment where I was taking one of his courses and I was enjoying it thoroughly. And for me, it was this, it hadn't really even crossed my mind in terms of, I didn't have the exact background to go right into neuroscience, but I had the foundation there, right? And so that was kind of the nice thing about doing all the pre-med courses in Bozeman. And so, yeah, I went through the process, applied, was accepted into his lab. and then was able to study stress and decision making. And he was one of the individuals that absolutely shaped kind of the formation of how you think about something, how do you solve a problem, how do you come up with hypotheses, right? How do you explore data? What is it that you're actually looking for? And then the other part too is how do you think about having we call it having a flexible frame, right? So leaving yourself along the track that you've set out, but at the same time being open to new opportunities and new explanations. And so a lot of times the experiments we set up, we would set them up purposely, which we try and do today as well, where if our hypothesis was proven, like it worked out how we thought it was going to, fantastic. And if it didn't, it also meant something very important for us, right? So it's kind of that idea of setting it up so there wasn't ever a true like failed experiment. It was like, oh, that didn't go out, but we found this out, kind of the serendipity and trying to set ourselves up for success in that way, which was fantastic. And so transitioning out of the PhD program, graduating with that, and then longer version story, which I'll truncate for this portion. And
we want the full version. Story? Okay, we want to know how you got.
Okay. So the long version, the fun story, I knew who I wanted to work with for my postdoc. I was very specific with that. And it's this individual who is out of a very well-known Ivy League university on the East Coast, super hard to get in touch with. Basically, he has very few publications, but he's working with stress and decision-making at a very interesting level. I'm a little vague on purpose on a lot of this, just as a heads up. So anyways, talked to the head of the department that he was in at his university at a conference after I met this individual a couple times, the head of the department. And I said, hey, do you know so-and-so? And his eyes lit up and he goes, how do you know him? I said, I don't actually know him, but I know of his work and I'd like to see if he's interested in having a postdoc at some point. He goes, give me your email address. We'll see what happens. Ooh. I was like, well, that seems weird, but okay. And so I gave my email address and thought, well, nothing will ever happen. And about a month later, I got an email from the individual and he's like, hey, heard you might be looking for a postdoc in a little bit. Come out, we'll do an interview and we'll see how it goes. I was like, fantastic. And so went out, had this incredible experience. Things were going well and everything was ready to go. So I graduated in May, and then about June timeframe, I sent an email because he said, contact me in the middle of summer, we'll figure out logistics. And the other fun part is it was not funded as a traditional postdoc, meaning it wasn't coming through like an NIH or an NSF grant. And I emailed him and Jimmy goes, oh, I've been meaning to email you. Some things happen, our funding's paused for a year, so we'll just pick it up in a year. And I thought, I have my first child on the way, I can't just not have figure out something for a year is a little bit, terrifying. I said, okay, thank you. I'll keep you posted on my situation. Don't know if that's going to work for me or not. And that was like the end of I don't remember exactly what week it was. That was the end of the week. And then the beginning of the next week, I'm literally going to get coffee, meet some friends to kind of see, what opportunities are out there. And I ran into a friend who I hadn't seen in a while. And she's one of the executives at this massive health system in Sioux Falls. And as I'm walking in, she goes, hey, Justin, how are you? I was like, good. She goes, do you know statistics? I was like, yeah, I know. She goes, cool. She goes, and then science? Like, are you good at science? I was like, yes, I am a scientist. I was like, that's what I am, kind of thing. She goes, oh, cool. Well, I might give you a call sometime. I was like, all right, that was weird, but sounds great. I'll talk to you later. And then through a series of increasingly bizarre interviews with that health system, this is all kind of before data science was even really a word. They were looking to set up essentially an advanced analytics or a data science team there. And I, fortuitously lucked out in terms of getting to be asked to help set that up for them. And the fun part, when I was interviewing for it, I kept telling the story to them of, this is again, this series of bizarre interviews. I kept meeting people that were higher up in the organization to where at one point I was sitting across the table from the CMO, Chief Medical Officer. I was like, why am I meeting the Chief Medical? I was like, what is this? Because they didn't even have a name for the job yet. I mean, they were still trying to figure it out. And the story I was explaining to her was, because she's like, we have a lot of data. I said, I have a lot of data. I thought I had a lot of data as a PhD student, right? As a PhD candidate. And I said, one of the things I kept thinking about, and the reason why data has always been so attractive, not just creating it through the experimental process, but just being able to experience, the possibility that are the answers that lie, the aha moments that lie within. And the story I was telling her essentially was that I had an army of I think I had 6 or 7 undergrads at one point analyzing as a human, which now we would use computer vision for, animal behavior, right? And they're watching videos because I had to videotape all my experiments. And it was this moment I had when I was doing that. I was, watching 2 of them kind of come in and setting them up and getting them, helping out with scoring for a second. I was like, there has to be a better way to do this. Like, there has to be a computer or some way to be able to, and literally at that point, I'm describing computer vision that really hadn't made it out of like a few labs in the country. I think Google was starting to do it, but the word didn't exist. And I asked all the math professors I could find. I asked some friends that were doing their PhDs in statistics. I had a couple of conversations, had some contacts in University of Minnesota. I was talking to people there, and they were like, we don't even know what you're talking about. And I was like, well, it has to exist. I was like, yeah.
If you can think it, you can make it.
Right, exactly. And so it was this fascinating place to be where I knew it had to exist somewhere. I didn't have the exact skill set to build it myself at all, but I knew it had to be out there, right? I knew there had to be a better way to analyze video data. And so I remember I found somebody that put me in touch with a potential contact. I think they were Carnegie Mellon, I believe, at the time. Anyways, I before I emailed them, I went and talked to my professor, like to Dr. Summers, and I said, I may have found a place where I can go and learn this technique, i.e. computer vision. Can I go and do it? And he's like, absolutely. He's like, it'll just add like a year and a half onto your degree. I was like, well, I'm not doing that. I was like, at this point, I'm too far in. I was like, I need to get done. And I said, okay. But that was kind of that catapulting moment of like, there's more out there that we can squeeze out of all these massive, large data sets that we have available to us. And so that was kind of how the transition, that spark of, I don't know what's next, but one of my good friends, my lab mates, he has the famous quote that I repeat all the time. His name is Dr. Russ Carpenter. He was a professor at Stanford for a while, and now he's moved on. But his response is, the job you'll have in 5 years doesn't exist yet. Meaning, we get to do really exciting, creative things. And a lot of times the idea is out there, but there may not be a word associated with it yet. And that's what we run into kind of often in the healthcare system too, as well as trying to have a discussion on what is it you're looking to solve? What's the problem you want to solve? And then what are the techniques we have available? Like we try and draw things on the whiteboard, and we don't always have the language skills as humans yet to describe what it is that we're looking to do. And that's where I get excited in terms of, how do we take current machine learning technology and, stacks and systems that we're able to build and models we can build, and then how do we convey it in a way that's so simplistically easy, anyone can look at it and say, oh yeah, that's what we should be looking at, or that's the important one, right? That's what gets me excited kind of in a day-to-day realm in terms of taking, and again, too, it doesn't hurt to have the neuroscience background to say this is how humans process visual information. And that's really fun because sometimes you look like I jokingly say, you look like a ninja or a magician when somebody goes, oh, wow, this is super easy. You're like, it is, because there's a lot of work in the background.
I make it look easy, right?
The plan is you pick it up and go, of course we should do this. Absolutely. That is something that I very much enjoy experiencing, and also with the team that I've built at St. Luke's, kind of trying to cultivate that attitude as well, which they're phenomenal. So that's pretty fantastic.